Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching The Big Picture with me, Frank Pereira. A CBI court on Monday awarded a 2-year jail term to 3 IAS officers, a retired coal secretary and 2 serving bureaucrats for cheating and criminal conspiracy in a coal block allocation case. The conviction of H.C. Gupta, the retired IAS officer, on corruption charges is a first for a secretary rank officer in the union government to face imprisonment in what is now known as the coal scam. Gupta has been hauled up for taking certain decisions between 2006 and 2009 when he served as the coal secretary and in that capacity as the presiding officer of the screening committee that recommended allocation of the coal blocks. Gupta and others have also been charged with misrepresenting facts to the then Coal Minister Manmohan Singh, who was in charge of the coal ministry during the major part of this period. On this edition of The Big Picture, we will take a look at the implications of the coal scam verdict. Joining me on the program today are Anjali Bhardwaj, co-convener, National Campaign for People's Right to Information; Ajay, former Secretary, Ministry of Commerce and Industry; A.K. Bhattacharya, Editorial Director, Business Standard; and Justice S.N. Dhingra, former Judge, Delhi High Court. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of The Big Picture. I'd like to start with the lady on the program, Anjali Bhardwaj. What are the implications really as far as the political class is concerned from this coal scam verdict?
Well, I think that it's extremely important that those who are in important positions where there are checks and balances that need to be maintained on expenditure of public money, on allocation of natural resources, that there be absolute transparency in the way some of that work is conducted, and there be absolute accountability for their functioning. And I think that it's extremely important that this particular case, which has been at the forefront, has caught the imagination of the country and has also brought up very important issues related to corruption, related to the Prevention of Corruption Act itself, because we've seen subsequently that there have been moves to amend the Prevention of Corruption Act to take away the criminal misconduct clause, which says that as long as there is pecuniary advantage that's given to somebody and public interest is not borne out, that itself is enough to prove criminal misconduct. We are seeing a lot of these things playing themselves out, and I think that this is a significant judgment that has come out.
It is a significant judgment nonetheless, but Mr. Dua, as a former bureaucrat yourself, has this verdict really dealt a major blow to bureaucracy in the country?
Frank, let me start by making a disclosure that Mr. H.C. Gupta and I joined the IAS in the same year. What we call, he's a batchmate of mine, and I hold him in very high regard for his probity and his honesty. Having said that, looking at this particular case, I think the decision which has been given, the judgment by the court, CBI court, is bound to impact the morale and the risk-taking capacity and the willingness of the bureaucracy, including the senior bureaucracy. When I say this, I am not finding any fault with the judgment per se, which, as we all know, the case was reopened after the Supreme Court judgment in 2014. Otherwise, the CBI in 2012 had closed this case, saying it just couldn't find anything. But the Supreme Court, when it cancelled all the allocations between 2004 and 2009, this case thereafter came to be opened, was reopened. The fact of the matter is there has been procedural deficiencies in the decision making. Some of these you referred to yourself and have been now by the previous speaker also. Similarly, and that procedural deficiencies include not spelling out the reasons for preferring a particular application over another, recording the reasons for rejecting others, because the applications are always more than the the benefits or in this particular case the coal mines which are available, and also, as has been pointed out, that the application was, this particular application was ab initio deficient. Having said that, I'm moving on to the next issue, that if there is administrative lapse, does that necessarily amount to criminal conspiracy? And does it also make the act a criminal act per se, particularly when in the present, the way the Loss Prevention of Corruption Act, where it stands today, it does not define public interest.
Sure. You know, taking the point that you're making forward, I think Justice Dhingra can further elucidate that point and, you know, talk about it. Justice Dhingra?
You see,
Yeah.
I also had worked with Mr. Ajay Gupta, so let me disclose as a member of Competition Commission.
That's right.
I am not here to talk about, you see, the judgment. And since I had no opportunity to work with him in bureaucracy, I do not want to comment on what you have said. See, what I find is that bureaucracy today and for last many years has been dancing to the tune of political masters instead of doing their public duty. This I have seen closely, being, you see, holding commission of inquiry in allocation and in granting licenses. See, how the bureaucracy works is that it gets message from the top, this application is to be allowed. This message goes to the downmost Babu, he prepares the file, comes to the secretary, it goes to the minister, and it is approved. See, I am surprised by the comment that full facts were not given to the minister. See, I do not know what full facts mean. When a file is sent to the minister, it is full of all facts. It is his obligation and duty, since he is a signing authority, to go through the file. If he has to depend upon the information given by the secretary, secretary should be the final authority. Minister should not sign the file. But unfortunately in this country, see, the ministers always escape by saying that full facts were not disclosed, and they are the real lien holders who get their entire work done through the secretaries. See,
Justice Dhingra, I'm going to take that point that you're making forward with Mr. Bhattacharya. Is that what has happened in this particular case? The politician has escaped and the bureaucrat has been made the scapegoat.
Well, not entirely. I think this judgment and this development, in my view, brings out major governance flaws in this country which have been dogging our system for the last several years. I'll just cite 3 points in favor of in support of my argument. Number 1, under whose influence and suggestion did the CBI close the case in 2012? That itself was, to my mind, was a flawed decision. Why was it closed then? And why did it have to be reopened after Supreme Court declares this allotments illegal and wants the case to be reopened? So it's very clear
the CBI,
that your chief investigative body
said, Mr. Bhattacharya, like the Supreme Court itself said, the CBI was a caged parrot in 2012.
That's the first point. The second point is, if the civil servants, in this case, I will go by the general assessment that Mr. Gupta has been one of the most honest officers. All the 3 officers in question belong to the Indian Administrative Service. Now, when these 3 people have been convicted, what it also brings out is the fact that the civil servants, even if they may be deficient in presenting information that is required to the minister, as Justice Dhingra pointed out, that the minister gets away. The question that we need to answer today is, if the minister wants the civil servants to toe a certain line, today the real message here is the civil servants must take the lesson from this and say that I will not listen to a minister's suggestions unless it is written on the file. Now, there are some bureaucrats I know who have always insisted on ministerial directives to be put on the file, and earn the wrath of the minister, but some bureaucrats insist on that, and probably they get away from such situations. Point number 3, and that's my final point, is that even though the screening committee, as you mentioned, has cleared this case, what happens to the complicity of people who had recommended those cases, particularly in this case the Ministry of Steel, and the state government officials, the state government administration, in this case is Madhya Pradesh. Now they provided the information and recommended the case to the screening committee. Now it is a fact that information was not adequate. Some information were hidden as basic as the net worth of the company. Even that information was away from the screening committee. While the screening committee failed in its task to bring that out, but in my view, what has happened to the complicity of the state government officials who recommended the case, and what happened to the other ministries, and indeed the Prime Minister's office and the Cabinet Secretariat, which is supposed to actually assist the Prime Minister in getting information out. So what you are seeing actually is a problem of governance at various levels.
That's a very valid point that you're making.
And this is a wake-up call in my view.
Yes, Mr. Dua.
I would go along with what's being said, but add to that the complexity of governance is a fact which we must reckon with. A number of subjects are technical in nature. Everybody in every service cannot probably be as good in one job compared to the other. In this particular case, he's talked of 3 IAS officers. Actually, a screening committee member is only one, the chairman. Other 2 have looked at the papers in their capacity.
Junior at that time.
No, one because they have to go.
Joint secretary.
Yeah, they have looked at the papers as officials of the ministry. Screening committee recommends, the case comes back to the ministry. The ministry records a note for the approval of the minister concerned. So these 2 gentlemen have actually sat in judgment over the screening committee and also failed to point out that what were the errors in the processing by the screening committee. Thereafter, now Mr. Gupta comes in his second role as the chairman of the, in one case is the chairman of the screening committee, then as the secretary of the department, and he has processed the file all the way up to the Prime Minister, but as in his capacity as the Minister for Coal. The point I'm just trying to make is checks and balances in the system are extremely necessary.
Sure.
And I think by everywhere saying a person who's performed well in a particular job will do equally well elsewhere can sometimes compromise matters or impact efficiency.
Sure, fair enough. Justice Dhingra, I want to take the point that both our speakers have made forward. The decision was a collective one, but the punishment is being singled out as only the IAS cadre officers are being punished. Why is it so? Shouldn't the punishment also be collective?
See, I think Mr. Dua will endorse to this. The persons below screening committee and the chairman below screening, they are only to help the screening committee. They are to bring facts before the screening committee.
Sir, they are people of other ministries.
Yes.
So
collective,
what I have like Mr. Bhattacharya spoke about how there were state officers involved.
This is what I am saying.
There were
I
officials
have seen and studied not one, about more than 200 files.
Right.
See, what the process being filed at the secretary level is to see the recommendation given by this, and this recommendation is at the instance of some political boss or somebody, and this is blindly approved. See, the failure of governance is not that you are not checking is that because you are not checking the facts. You are going by the approval or message sent to the minister. I have seen a case where the worth of a person is written on the file. He is worth granting license because he is son-in-law of so and so. no other fact given on the file. While as per law, you need to assess the value of the company, the investment made by the company, its property, etc. On the file, it is written that he is son-in-law of so-and-so, so he is worthy of being granted a license. And this travels right from lower level to the secretary level, chief secretary level, and to the chief minister, and is approved by everybody. This is how the things are practically done.
So shouldn't the punishment also be collective?
This is what I am saying, that I am surprised that the minister goes scot-free while he is a final authority assisted by chief secretary and everybody else.
Sure.
Even while down below, Ministry of Steel recommended the case.
Ministry of Steel, there are other state government officials from Madhya Pradesh who are involved.
Recommendation is something different.
Sure, fair enough. Let's take the discussion forward now. Anjali Bhattacharya, you know, there's a lot being said about Mr. H.C. Gupta's character. Everyone's talking about how honest he's been. He's someone with impeccable character. Could it just be a case of oversight as far as he's concerned and an honest mistake? So shouldn't the system have some kind of a scope for an honest mistake being made?
Well, I think the central question here is not of his personal integrity, but that of bureaucratic accountability. When we say that there are senior officials, bureaucrats who are responsible, who are at the helm of affairs in terms of screening committees which are responsible for giving out these kinds of contracts, dealing with natural resources of the kind that we are seeing, I think it's extremely important to understand what is the kind of accountability that we expect from them, and that ought to be in place. Now, over here, we've heard there are some very critical issues that are coming up. One is that of political interference and political pressure. And I think that that's a reality which we can't dismiss in a country like ours. So what is it that we really expect if somebody is actually honest, wants to perform their job honestly? What is it that must be ensured? And it's extremely critical here to make sure that all decisions, all instructions are in writing. Because in fact, there are many Supreme Court orders also to this effect. It's critical that when there is an instruction given by anybody, especially even political leaders, they ought to be in writing, and only then must they be executed by the bureaucrat if they do want to preserve their integrity and their reputation. The other issue which I think is critical is, which is repeatedly coming up, is that there were other people also who are involved, and also why in 2012 the case was closed and it has again been reopened. And I think over here, the whole issue of having independent and empowered bodies to look into cases of corruption is something that's critical. The Lokpal law was demanded for that reason. It was passed in 2014. It still hasn't been implemented. We don't have a single Lokpal till date. The purpose of the Lokpal is that when these kind of complex cases come up, which involve political leaders, which involve senior government officials, but then also involve a whole gamut of other people, they're properly investigated into, and wherever there is collective liability, that's also considered, and nobody goes scot-free. But more importantly, there is no scope for people closing cases when it suits them and opening them when it doesn't. So I think that this is extremely important. The other issue, which is that of his personal integrity, which you brought up, I have no comment to make on that. I do not know Mr. Gupta. I'm very well willing to believe, if people have certain experiences. But the issue here is that everything ought to be completely transparent, because it's also about, when we say that assets have to be disclosed, under the Lokpal law, one of the very important provisions was that all public servants, their spouses and their dependent children had to declare their assets. In our country, it's very difficult to catch corruption, and there are just some very limited ways by which people can actually catch corruption happening. One is when there is disproportionate assets. Now, unfortunately, this government, the current government, moved the amendment, and the entire parliament passed the amendment to the Lokpal law, which has done away with the provision of assets of dependents and of spouses also being made public. And we know that in our country, it's not just financially that people are are sort of rewarded. It could be in the form of land, which could not just be in their own names, but also parked in the names of their dependents and spouses. Also post-retirement benefits. So I think it's a very complex issue which needs to be properly looked into, and then of course for justice to be perceived to be done as well, the investigation also needs to be free, fair and transparent.
Fair enough. Yes, Mr. Dua, you wanted to make a point.
I think what is it's been realized that the government servant's job, I'm not holding a brief out, I've been out of bureaucracy for a while now, that it's not easy for a government servant to function independently and yet be able to take risks, yet be able to take decisions. Towards that, there has been a realization by the political masters. So we've been having for the last 3 years, since 2013 actually, for the last 4 years, a Prevention of Corruption Act amendment before the Parliament. It's gone up twice to the Parliament, standing committees and others come back to the cabinet with some recommendations. I'm hoping that this amendment, which is actually going to be addressing 2 issues. One, saying for an economic offence as against a criminal offence, prior approval of the government would be needed before a prosecution can be started. And that would include retired government servants also, like Mr. H.C. Gupta. Other 2 are serving that. Even in their case, the prior approval would be needed of the employer. I think that will probably add to the, it would be helpful in decision making not coming to a halt, as is being feared could be an impact of this particular judgment. Second, what is needed is, it's very easy to say that a bureaucrat, particularly the secretary who has to interact with the minister virtually, much more than anyone else. He does it on behalf of the whole ministry or bureaucracy of the ministry, to say, please give it to me in writing. Everything which you are telling me, I know it's not as per the rules, it's against it, I'll give it to me in the writing. Now what happens is, repeatedly saying this to the minister, and if the minister is able to get the Prime Minister also on his own side, or at least there's a perception that he's close to the Prime Minister, bureaucrats think that I will be only shunted out of this ministry, I'll go somewhere else. I have security of tenure in government, but not security of tenure in a particular job. So how does one deal with that issue? And I would think that something which has been talked about for several years, not only in India but in the UK, elsewhere, which they have a similar system of bureaucracy, saying civil services boards should be deciding an assignment of a bureaucrat, not politicians. And once the civil service board has come to a particular conclusion or to a recommendation, appointment will be by the government, but on the recommendation of an outside board, then that person should get a security of tenure in that job. He would be able to exert himself far more.
But would that also lead to complacency?
No, complacency, fine. The question is, a civil service board would have looked at him after 35, 37 years of service.
No, I mean, I personally feel that these are very good suggestions. I think the Prevention of Corruption Act needs to be reformed. Civil Services Board will go a long way in ensuring that the political interference in the bureaucrats' functioning and transfers are reduced. But ultimately, it is the conduct of the civil servants that is going to decide it. Because even if you are changing the Prevention of Corruption Act, which is proposed to be changed by making sure that if there is no pecuniary gain from an action taken under this thing, and there will be no Prevention of Corruption Act charges, so I think this is not going to be solved by only amending the Prevention Corruption Act or bringing in the Civil Services Board. It is important that the civil services must not succumb to the pressure of the political masters, and should not, give due procedures a short shrift. Now, please remember, in my view, that this judgment is being criticized or being discussed in this kind of TV debate is also because that there is an element of criminal conspiracy which has been leveled against these officers, and people, I think, are by and large accepting that there was incompetence on their part. But I think people are still not believing that whether there was criminal conspiracy, because in a criminal conspiracy there has to be pecuniary gain, and
Yes.
that pecuniary gain has not been established. So therefore,
True.
incompetence, not being very adept in their jobs, of course they should be penalized for that. But for criminal conspiracy, you do not know.
This is
Sure.
exactly
Fair
what I'm
enough.
saying.
Yes, Justice Dhingra.
See,
Your closing
one
comments on the
criminal
program.
conspiracy doesn't mean pecuniary gain.
No, this
it
is-
only means that in order to commit a crime,
Yes.
several minds have come together to commit the crime. The crime may be benefiting not yourself, someone else.
That's 120B
So-
of the CP. That's what we are
Yes.
talking about.
So criminal conspiracy is that. You see, what I want to emphasize is, see, this case should at least give a wake-up call to the bureaucracy that they are not government servant or servants of the government. They are public servants.
That's right.
They are there to serve this nation.
Yes, nation comes first.
Nation is first. And if they find something wrong, even at the instance of minister, they should be capable of putting their foot down. Sorry. In this case, in 2005 itself, the auction was the method and procedure suggested.
But not yet for a systematic failure.
See,
Not
you may call
adopted.
it systematic failure, but 2005 auction was the, you see, mode of allotment which was discussed and approved. Suddenly, from auction, they again came to allotment.
Sir, the suggestion is of 1993. That it should be auctioned. Now, sorry to butt in,
Yes,
Judge sir.
but-
But the fact of the matter is, for 15 years, the government did not take a final view, and the matter, they linked it
I
up.
again ask,
They
what is
linked it-
government?
No, sir, I'm just one. They linked it up to the MMRDA
Very
Act.
quickly, I'm running out of time. so-
MMRDA Act amendment, which was before the Parliament, and they waited for the Act to be passed in Parliament
Right.
before moving on to the auction system.
Yes, Justice Dhingra, complete
So
your point.
what I want to emphasize is that unless bureaucracy, you see, stands up, not for secretary level people, but from the SDM level people, this bureaucracy is not going to improve.
Fair enough.
You see, the SDM is openly beaten by an MP.
Yes.
And the secretary doesn't come to the rescue of the this.
True.
Or the police officer doesn't come to the rescue
Justice,
and
I'm sorry to
doesn't
cut you short
arrest the
because
MP
I'm out of time.
immediately.
Anjali Bhardwaj, in 30 seconds, your concluding remarks. Let me close the show with you.
Yeah, well, I believe that we talked about discretion, but discretion cannot be equated to lack of accountability. Due diligence must be followed, and there has to be accountability for decisions. If there are allegations of not actually putting all facts on record also, these are very, very, very critical, very concerning allegations and issues that have been made. I think the issue of the PCA being amended itself is very concerning, because
Right.
it says that in order to be able to prosecute or even launch an investigation into cases of corruption, the prior permission of the government will have to be taken. We know that in our country, most prosecution doesn't get taken because the government never gives its permission. So I believe that that is not something that should be done. Yes, we don't want that every action of a bureaucrat is you know, there is a problem. We do
I'll have to
want,
cut you short
however,
there.
that a Lokpal, an independent body, gives that sanction so that it's fair on both sides.
Okay, fair enough. On that note, we'll have to call it a wrap on this edition of The Big Picture. Anjali Bhardwaj, AK Bhattacharya, SN Dhingra, and Ajay, thank you so much for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. That's all the time we have. See you again next time.